born ready.
Okay. Somehow I knew that about it.
Right? All right, it looks like the camera's on. All right, cool. How you guys doing?
Great.
Yeah, welcome to the artist speaker, what is it called?
Artist Evolution.
Artist Evolution. Here, we're at the winery in Norwalk, Ohio, just to give, credence. And then, yeah, so I'm gonna talk about art. Mostly I'm a musician and a writer, and I'm trying to become a filmmaker if I can. I don't know, I'm writing a script right now that's like in limbo, so to say, right? And I'm a multi-instrumentalist, I guess you should say, right? Like, the drums have been a newly acquired, practice, and I went from saxophone. Well, kind of. I went from keyboard. We had a keyboard when I was a kid, and then saxophone, trombone, guitar, bass guitar, and then keys. I hit piano when I was about 20. I went to Terra Community College's music tech program, and then it was like a requirement to play piano. So I took a lot of songwriting classes over there, a lot of learning how to work a mixer board, how to use, computer recording software, and all that world. Some music theory and stuff too. So I'm not all completely self-taught necessarily, but I definitely felt like I needed to reject a lot of what they were saying over there, or at least the music theory part of it, just because I had my own. I was like, oh, it's like you don't even need to know what you're doing, as long as you can feel what you're doing, and then that's all it is, And so I took, after I graduated there, I started a recording studio here in Norwalk for about 4 years. We mostly did punk rock. We did several of the local bands that weren't punk rock as well, recording, and then I started a band. It was called the Underground Airplane, and it was kind of like a progressive punk rock band. Like, we did different time signatures sometimes, but mainly I just build everything around 1 and 5 progressions. This is like the simplest way that I could communicate to my bass player. And that's all rock and roll is anyway, because the power chord is just a 1-5 chord. And so that was my, whole, but all the melody lines, right, were all just you sit down and then hit enough notes in a row until they all kind of line up, and you're like, oh, and then it ends here. Oh, okay, cool. And then that's the melody, and then that's just how I formulated all that entire band essentially. And then that band broke up, and I ended up going to Kent State, not for music at all, but I ended up in the piano lab all the time, cutting classes and stuff, just playing. Did graduate, and then I had started a bunch of bluegrass jug bands. I was playing washboard in different bands around the time period, because I didn't know everything that I did up to that point was all rock and roll and all real I'm making up everything that we're doing, and I don't know how other people write music at all, And then so when I was in those folk kind of bluegrass bands, it was really cool, but I didn't understand it at all until and then I realized that all they're doing is playing 3 chords, and it's all 1-4-5 progression. And then I was like, oh yeah, I took music college, I know what that is, cool. And then it was the easiest thing in the world. And then I got immediately bored of playing washboard. I had this, called it the Bangity Plank drum station for a minute there, where we put a bunch of pots and pans on a pole, and then I'd be playing that and washboard and all these different things. Also was in a drum circle on campus that we had pretty regular, once a week, every Tuesday. We would all meet in the middle on the quad or whatever in the middle of campus there, and I would just stand up and try to bring people in and be like, come here and know me better, man. And I was trying to be the theatrical one, or I don't know, it was a lot of fun. And that happened for about 3 years, all throughout when I was going to school there. And then we had my one band, all of us, we ended up moving into a house together, and that's where the whole great Grandpa Beebe thing came from, because I was in Johnny and the Apple Stompers band, and also Rambunctious Bunch, and I started calling Johnny Grandpa Johnny, because he was a jukebox of bluegrass music, right? And so then he started calling me Great Grandpa Beebe because I was older than him. We moved to a house that was on Earl Avenue. That was my Great Grandpa Beebe's name was Earl. And then so Johnny would come over for practice and be like, hey, Great Grandpa Beebe, you know, the whole time. And then so I ended up, there was one day where like it switched from me being in these bands to me being Great Grandpa Beebe. It was like, I went upstairs and I was like, oh, I'm tired of playing percussion stuff. I want to go upstairs and write real songs. And like, so I wrote a song that ended up being called Chug Kaboom, or at least the melody line for it. And they wrote a really cool kind of like gypsy-esque song downstairs, and they were all real excited. And I was like, oh man, I just wrote this song. And they're like, we just wrote this song. And I felt like it split at that point. You know? It was like some kind of like cell symbiotic kind of, you know, I don't know, dividing thing happening. But yeah, I ended up like having all those cats on the album that I was writing at the time. And then everyone in Norwalk I knew was on the album, and that became the Hot Boats and Potato Babies album. It came out in 2013, and that's when I started calling myself Great Grandpa Beebe. And then I had the festival called Jubileego, which is Great Grandpa Beebe's 100th birthday, because I didn't want to turn 30, and that was my 30th birthday, and so I just turned 100 instead. And then I've been here for the last 10 years doing that, you know? So, and now I'm here.
Now, did you have a musical family?
No, Dad played trombone for like 2 weeks in like 5th grade or something, and my aunt had a really cool music stand that she wanted in like 5th grade or something that I still use, but she was only in band for a couple weeks as well or something. And my mom liked piano, but she never played a lot of it. She had like a little keyboard, and that's like kind of, I grew up like doing sound effects on it and things, you know, like, because it was like kind of like it was a Yamaha keyboard in the 80s, so every Yamaha keyboard in the 80s had to look like a DX7 because that was the biggest keyboard. Yeah. Yeah, I found that out recently. I'm way into synthesizers now. Like, this is my whole world is electronic music. There's a show in Canada tomorrow. If I can get my passport, I have to find it. It's doesn't matter. I'm gonna do that after here. That's where I'm at. But anyway, yeah. So that's kind of my history of like, that's been my art form. As far as like writing is concerned, I've always written short stories, and like music was always kind of a vehicle to facilitate writing for a while, or at least that's the way I perceived it, I guess. Because I always like I wrote like, I don't know, poetry or whatever, stories in my notebooks before I started playing guitar, and then it just kind of naturally ran together after that point. So where like, after I was 20 years old, I wrote an album of worth of material every year since then, basically. And that's all just like lyrics and music together wise. And you know, obviously different bands would have different things, or you know, you make up things on the spot all the times, and like that's a lot of fun. I kind of been known, a lot of people wonder if I just make up songs on the spot all the time, right? Like, because sometimes it sounds like I'm just like talking through my song, and that is true. I do that because like when I'm doing solo stuff, I don't have anybody to like, you know, keep the rhythm or keep me on time or anything like that. So I can just like, you know, go off on tangents, whatever I'm thinking, and sometimes it rhymes, sometimes it doesn't. Or you read the room and you start like, you know, pointing things out, that kind of thing too, which is a lot of fun.
So do you ever sit down to write a song? Do you know what I mean? Or is it more like inspirations and boom, now I'm writing a song?
Yeah, I would say both in different ways. Like last summer I wrote an album where like I was like kind of seeing this girl, and it was like real kind of rocky because like we started seeing each other, and then she moved down to North Carolina for the summer, and so then it was like okay, and then I went down to North Carolina. Anyway, like it was just like a lot of turmoil, like from about June to October. And then by October I went back through my phone and I was like, wow, there's a ton of songs on here, like that I just like I would just set up the phone and hit record of whatever I was doing that I thought was cool at the time, you know. And so that turned into that album, and then by the end of October I just recorded it all in 2 weeks. like, you know, drums, bass, guitar, synth. Actually, I did play any guitar and a little acoustic, nothing electric, but I don't know. You have to have boundaries. Like you make up your own set of rules, or I don't know. I'm just getting in the synthesizers or synthwave or whatever you want to call it. I'm trying to like facilitate that by using the songs that I'm writing and just kind of focusing towards like these will be the melody lines, or these are now textures. You know, like because synths are very useful for texture-wise, or even like organ is very useful. Like Sun Ra like would play, where he's just like you watch him play and he's just like all over. It doesn't even look like he's playing notes. He's so sporadic, you know. Whereas like Thelonious Monk is like an entirely different type of player altogether. He's very methodical but always different, always improvising, and that's like. Anyway, I don't need to get off the tangents like that, you know, but
I
like,
asked the question.
yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, so I'm gonna get to my notes here. Like that was just introduction, right? That's kind of where I'm at right now, I guess, with things. But philosophically, right? Like as an artist, I think that any kind of artist is a collector, overarching one, right? Like that's kind of like your job as an artist is to like find your favorite things and then keep them, and then like like when you're in the middle of your process that you're like, oh, you know what I would really want to have happen here is this thing that I held on to. You know, I didn't know what it was for at the time. I just really like it when people do this or whatever.
Yes.
You know, and that's I think that's any artist just does that as a natural response. Yeah, and then vulnerability is the other, I guess, makes it come alive in a way, right? Like there's like a certain sense of how do you put yourself in the front, you know, and like how can you be comfortable with that? And then that's where like I was gonna get into the whole the fear, and then like you have to be brave. You have to be afraid to be brave about it, right? One time a guy told me that in your brain, the way your brain perceives fear is the same way that it perceives excitement, and so like that's how I frame it to myself too. Like if I get like stage fright or something like that. Also, I try to stay in front of either a camera or an audience on a regular basis. You know, that way it becomes kind of more of a natural thing too. That's kind of the idea of the podcast too, especially during lockdown. I used to just play open mics all the time, you know, just to stay fresh and like natural or something, and not afraid. And so, yeah, that's a big part of all of that. The other side of the whole like vulnerability thing then too is like when you're writing your own things, when you're like putting your own ideas forward, it's very like it comes back to like not only are you projecting it outwards, but you're also like everything you project comes back on you like 5 times, 10 times, because not just because of like I don't know some metaphysical idea, but like also because like you're the one playing that song all the time. And it meant something to you when you wrote it, and it's almost like you're creating markers or reminders to yourself, like oh, this is the thing that happened to you. This is what you wanted to do next time, or something. I always think of like conversation is an art form, and so like if you're like at a party and you're like after the party you're like, oh, I should have said this thing would have been awesome, and then so that's the thing that like you're like, oh, it's not I should have said this thing, it's I'm going to say this thing in the future because that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how you have to frame it to like keep your own sanity.
Yeah.
in just in I don't know, just in your own mind and your own thought process. I think that's important to hold on to. Which leads me to another point, and that's like the idea that art is its own like. Art is the practice of just making choices, right? Like you're saying, okay, like I'm I'm gonna make this choice, all of these choices, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just hoping that it comes out right. Or you're saying, hey, I have an influence, and I'm gonna use that as a template, and this is gonna be the template of my choices. And then you fail doing that, and then you're like, okay, well, this is why I failed doing that, and this is what I actually wanted to do, you know? And so it's a constant, like, reformulating, and it never really ends. And like, like, as far as like a writer is concerned, they say you're never done editing until you're dead, kind of idea, right? Like, which is very true. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that's really interesting as far as like the way that art impacts a person's life is just in the. It doesn't matter if you're even publishing it or putting it out there in the world, if you're just doing art and like confronting yourself with it. Like that in itself is a practice of choices and a practice of failure and a practice of realizing why you're failing and recalculating kind of idea. And then you kind of just stay fresh almost with it.
Without any of that, you don't have growth.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and so what is growth but change, right? Like it's like a constant like. I know when I was starting, I had like starting writing songs. I knew like I didn't know anything about the world, you know. Like I knew that internally. Like I didn't have the experiences or the breadth of experience or knowledge to like know what I was saying, even, you know. So. You know, you find out that Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Doors of Perception based off of the old William Blake quote, once the doors of perception are cleansed, things will appear as they truly are, infinite, right? And that is just like, wow, that's a really cool quote. What else does this guy do? And then so you get into William Blake and you're like, oh, I'm going to take this, the tiger. I put the tiger to music once and just, you know, did it as an industrial rock song, right? Like that was, it felt right. It was a lot of fun to do, and like I was like, oh wow, that's not like. And then going back to it, that was like my favorite piece that I did at that point, you know, at that time period. And I'm like, I didn't write it, but it was like it served as a stepping off point, right? Like, because then you kind of like learn how this guy writes super intimately. You know, like you learn the lyrics, you memorize the lyrics, you're like, wow, he uses these words in this structure. Like, you know, it's like, wow, okay, cool, you know? Like, these are things that are possible. I don't know, it was a lot of fun figuring all this out over the years, I guess, right? Like, that's why I keep doing it.
So you mentioned, you know, fear and vulnerability, but
Yeah.
earlier you also mentioned how shy you were, how quiet you were in high school. So
Yeah.
talk about that moment where you first decided to share in front of anyone.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, I probably was in high school. Yeah, it probably means a lot of different things, you know, like I know, like, as far as, like, how do you express art, right? I remember, this is probably my favorite, like, first memory of, like, sharing art that kind of, like, caught on in a way, was, like, I was in about 4th grade, and I started the Star Trek club with all my friends, right?
Yeah.
And, like, I was Spock, and, like, my buddy was Kirk, you know, and, like, McCoy, and, like, it wasn't because, like, we were huge nerds, but, like, at the same time, like, we would, like, take paper and we'd fold it up and make, like, communicators and phasers out of them, like, using, like, colored pens and things, and, like, the coolest part was that you could, like, write any words that you wanted to in any of the buttons, you know, and, like, that caught on really big in our grade, you know, amongst our friends, to the point where, like, we were banned from doing it because it kind of distracted from the class at large. Because we're all, like, trading them in class and shit, like, oh man, did you make that one? It's amazing, you know, like. But that was, like, I felt like that was, like, my first step into the art world or something. Other than just being on the school bus and, like, creating mazes for people to, like, try to, like, you know, complete. I'm like, I gotta do this, you know, like. or stuff like that, I guess, you know, always with a lot of paper. I always had paper and like a pen, and that was always just like the most entertaining thing to me, I guess, you know?
Yeah. Are you
And-
still a paper and pen guy?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I'm the same way.
I
Yeah.
am too. There is something about that connection.
Yeah, it's like it brings it into the real world.
Yeah.
And even like I typed out a bunch of things to say on my computer for this too, but like it's still not like real. In some ways, if you're writing like a novel or a short story, it looks more like a short story or a novel when it's typed, you know. And then so you feel like it's like, oh, this is like a real thing, you know. Like so, in that sense, that's why I like to type. But like when you're trying to get down notes, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like even I tried to write a novel once, and like every like I don't know 10 pages or 15 pages, I'd have to like go in and rewrite the entire outline for the next 10, 15 pages because the story changed from what I thought it was gonna be. Like the ending part of the story I never really got to. Like 185 pages later, I'm still like, well, this is a good ending, cool, you know, and I gotta leave the spot, so well, I guess I'm done. But yeah, I don't know, that was a weird experience, and I don't know, but it very much like informed a lot of the ways that I'm like writing a script. Like I wrote like immediately when I got back to Ohio from writing that book, I tried to start writing the second draft again, and I got a decent way into it, and but I ended up writing a short film script at the same time, just to like, I don't know, I guess I was on like a roll with character development. I was like trying different things like that, and I met my buddy who was doing film. He's like, hey, let's do like a grindhouse art film thing, and like you should totally do one. And I'm like, yeah, I should. Yeah, you want to film it? Cool. And so he ended up teaching me. My buddy Brad Walton ended up teaching me like all about video editing. That was back at the end of 2019. We filmed it, and then all through 2020 we like edited it down. And that's where I learned how to do video editing. And that's why I can do the podcast now, basically. But and then yeah, and then the script I'm writing right now is like a whole. I mean, it's all over the place right now. I won't get into all that right now, but like it is. I don't know. It's a lot of fun. Like me and my brother fleshed out the whole outline, and like we're like making beats to it, right? Like we're like, he's like, okay, you know that part in Back to the Future where it's like building tension and the music comes in, it's going bum 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 bum, 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 and then I'm like, yeah, and then this part, and then it comes in with the melody going na na na. I mean, he's like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, and it was like that kind of like bouncing off of each other. That was like just a lot of fun, you know, kind of like we've bounced like comic book ideas, movie ideas off each other for years. So it's like we've always done this, but we've never really like accomplished anything like that before. So that happened about a month ago. We did that, and it's his birthday today. So yeah, happy birthday, Josh. Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah, I don't know. There's some deep stuff on this page here too. So inner and outer worlds. Oh man, that's a whole. Like I was thinking about. I was like writing like a whole thing about like what I would talk about. Like how do you even know what the outer world is? Like it's just too phenomenal to even grasp at times. It's like we're all just like confused by like taxes and money, whereas like we're actually just on a planet that's flying through space and we don't even know where that's going. No one even talks about it. Like,
Pretend it's not happening.
it's like everyone's talking about taxes, but it's like, where's the planet going?
Yeah.
Right?
Isn't anyone covering it?
Right, yeah. So it's all a story of sorts, right? Like it's all like completely like subjectively how you want to look at it, I think, as far as what the world is externally. But then like internally is the only spot that we actually know what it is. I mean, we do in ways construct that world as well, and that is like part of the art form, right? Like that is like the choices that you're making in your life, and also like how those choices are reflected in your art, or just consequences. like well, I did this, so this is happening now, or like, or you know. But that's, I think that the most timeless art, or maybe the art that connects the best to other people, is like coming from an inner spot. I was doing a radio interview the other day with these guys coming through Connecticut. They played here at Water Bottom, and they were saying the best art asks questions, right? And whereas bad art answers questions. And I was like, that is profound.
Yeah.
And-
But,
right.
It should stir it up a little, or it should,
Yeah.
shake you at your core just a little.
Because being an artist, the idea of being an artist, I think, is very subversive. Like, it's very like, what is society like? Saying that we've always done it this way isn't an answer, right? Like that's, but that's bad art, right? That's like, oh well, I have the answers. This is what it is, and it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of questions about raises when you tell me something that you think is true. Like, so where and also I've heard it said, and this I think rings true on a wider spectrum, where you say like, okay, all knowledge in the universe, right, or whatever you want to say, we know like the dock of the ocean of knowledge that we don't know. Like like the things that we don't know is the ocean. The things that we do know is the dock that goes out like, I don't know, 15 feet, and then there's like miles that we have no idea what's going on. And so that's just, I don't know. I guess it's the same thing I was saying before, but it's important to like, grain of salt, right? Like the kind of like, we really don't know what's going on at all. And so like, you have to like, and that's the external world though, like that is also like, however you think, I mean like, it's a complete paradox if you're looking at from a material science point of view. Like you're like, oh well, this is a particle, but it's also a wave at the same time, and it's like, okay, that's the basis of reality. Great. So it's whatever you want to think it is, and however thought construct that you want to think it is at any given time. I don't know. It's super weird, and like that whole world gets really deep. And like every question that we answer at those levels raises 100 other questions. So it's like, okay, well, how does, like, why, I don't know. That's I can get into that for a while. But as far as art goes, like, I think that's the most important knowledge to keep about the external world, is that it is fleeting. It's all it's like time based, and it's all very like, yeah, I'm like the material body that it's only going to be here for a few more months, really, like like in the grand spectrum of things. Like I mean, you could think years, but that's even like clouding. It clouds what you think that you have, because like it's all subjective. Like we were talking about time and age a minute ago, right?
Yes.
Like where it's just like, oh wow, time just went by, and like now I'm here, and like has this moment always existed where it is right now, right? Like that's a whole anyway.
Trippy.
Right. Like part of my memory is just like what I need to exist in this present. I don't know. It's kind of, I mean, it is in a sense, right? Like if this is I don't know. I won't get into all
So
that.
where do you think like your art falls?
As far
is it
as
between external, internal? Is it?
I try to work in the abstract a lot, in surrealism, because I feel that like and Galileo knew this really well, right? He was an artist, but he was a scientist, and he was excommunicated from the church for saying that the Earth isn't the center of the universe, right?
Yes.
You can't tell people things directly, right?
Yes.
And so using like surrealism or like abstractions,
Yep.
you can say true things, within a weave, a tapestry of like other true things that don't necessarily make sense together, but on their own they do, or maybe they don't at all, and that's the point, right? Like to kind of to kind of like let things blend in together so that the people who are really looking can't see it, but the people who need to understand it, it hits them, kind of thing, right? Because you don't want to be burned at the stake for saying things, and then no one's going to believe you anyway, right? Like if you're trying to tell, if you try to tell anyone you know what's going on, and they're like, oh, this is the truth, this is what you need to know. It's like, I mean, I don't even need to know that information anyway, nor would anybody believe me. So it's like, you sing songs about love, you sing songs about, you know, like abstractions of like the universe and science, and like I basically just sing songs that are whatever lessons that I feel that I'm learning at the time, I try to document, and I try to document that feeling. And whatever those abstraction terms are that I'm feeling at the time, or that I'm trying to use as a guide, or that I'm trying to make a choice over. There was a song, I call it Shake the Light Bulb, but it's basically, it was just I found on TikTok, like someone was talking about things to say to yourself. I forget what it's called right now, but like things to tell yourself, right? Like, what if I have everything I need right now? Huh, yeah, okay. What if I did have everything, and then you can continue forward in your day. It's like one of those things where it's like you can jump over hurdles in your life that like, or mental blocks or things like that by telling yourself these ideas, right? So I just took some of those like kind of things and just thought they were too bland, so I just kind of like made them wilder and turned them into like the verse of the song, you know? That way I can tell myself these things at the same time I'm like painting a picture of like, you know, kind of a surrealistic idea. And I had a magazine that I was looking at the time, like that was like a zine from like a record shop. It's called the Galactic Zoo Dossier. And it's just a wild magazine full of like these 60s, 70s artists that this guy creates. He draws pictures of all of them, and he hand writes the entire book himself. He puts like a collection, like a music together, like a CD, and like sometimes cassette tapes. I don't know. He's pretty wild. There's like about 12 or 13 volumes of this thing that he's put together over the years. That's really, really cool. But yeah, so I took that, and then there was like a section in the book that talked about, you know, psychedelic stoner soundtracks to biker movies from the 70s, right? Like, I'm like, this is really cool. I like all of these things that are in this, and the way that he talks about them and things too. So the words for the song, and it didn't really have anything to do with this, it's kind of like almost like synthwave hipster type stuff, I felt like too, you know. Maybe that's who I am, I don't know, at the moment, right? Like, but the words were like, what if I'm a self-made psychedelic god? And then what if I deserve galactic cassette tape love? Right? Like, I felt good to say. I don't know. Everyone likes a good mixtape, you know, from the universe, right? Like, of like what they need to hear. It's like, this is what I need to hear right now, actually.
That's really cool. You can even use that as a hypnotic metaphor.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a mixtape from the universe.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you get one.
Yeah.
And it's
sometimes it's everything you needed to hear.
yeah,
So,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
It's super weird like that. Another way to look at it, I heard this just earlier today, is like, who does this like benefit, right? Like there's like an idea, like if you are creating something, or even just making a choice, you know, like who does this benefit in the long run? You know, it's like, oh, I'm buying this beer from this, you know, like company, like what do they do in the world, right? Like, because I'm supporting what that is, right? That's one way to look at it, right? Or if I'm like creating a choice in a song, and I'm like saying like, oh, I hate all of these people because of this, and it's like, that has consequences, and that has like, who does this benefit, you know, like, and I mean, I guess those are pretty obvious, you know, kind of choices. But it, like, when you're writing stuff and you're writing stuff from the heart, and sometimes you're angry, and sometimes you're using that angry energy for different things, you know. But you want to create like a roadmap for yourself to like navigate that anger and let it go into a better direction. Especially because like, and you know it when you do it. You know, if you can, I guess maybe I'm more in tune with it. But like I remember a long time ago writing songs that were a little bit jaded, right? And like I don't play those songs anymore because I'm not at that point. And like when I played them, I didn't feel good playing them, right? And I'm just like, oh, this hurts when I play this, so this isn't my song anymore, you know. And then it just disappears because no one's ever gonna remember it now, like, you know, like. But which is great. I mean, like I like how it's just like an ever kind of fleeting thing that is always just kind of in the moment, and it's always who you are, and it's always a combination of everything that you've done up to this point, you know. Like for a long time I would just do like character acting type of words, right? Like over the songs. I wasn't really singing. I was just trying to be like Tom Waits. I was just trying to like have a Tom Waits voice sometimes, right? And then I would call that the great Grandpa Beebe voice, right? And then, so that was like a character acting thing. Because I could kind of sound like Tom Waits at times, right? Like, but I mimicked a lot of people's voices growing up, so like lyrically and just like texture-wise of their voices. I can do a decent Bob Dylan and a decent, you know, Neil Young, and the guy, I used to do a pretty good like Kurt Cobain, like when I was real young, like angst-wise in the 90s. But he has definite like telltale signs of what his voice does and how he operates it. Or even like Lane Stanley from Alice in Chains, or like any of these guys, like they have like real telltale signs of like how they use their voice and how they sing and how they like raise notes in their voice, or how they just kind of like jump multiple notes and come down, and using like weird like vocal like methods to do that. I don't know. It's like I've always like just picked that out and tried to emulate those types of things, I guess, you know. And that's the whole collector mentality, right? Yeah, I don't know.
So it's the collection of all of those
Yeah.
that makes great Grandpa Beebe.
Yeah, and yeah, it definitely is true. And even and I played a set last night at the market. I haven't played a set acoustically since I don't know, last summer, right? So like I'm way out of practice, and I'm like, yeah, like they got a hold of me the day before, so I had no time to practice at all. So. But I had been, like, I do have shows coming up in the summer, so I had, like, picked up the guitar a couple times and played through, like, 5 songs at a time here and there. So I was, like, aware of where my voice is now, I guess, right? Like, so, like, I feel like my voice is at a different place now, or at least I'm approaching it in a different way, where I'm, like, I feel like there's still, like, a certain amount of gravel to it. Like, it's getting to be, but I'm not, like, forcing things as much either, and like early Grandpa Beebe stuff 10 years ago would have just been completely over the top and just like didn't have any, like, I mean, that's coming from like being in like multiple punk rock bands and rock bands to being in a drum circle where I'm just yelling like random stories that I'm making up, and then like to being in bluegrass bands where I'm like singing a bunch of like old-timey lyrics and stuff, and just I was always just like being loud. Like even when I was over at Terra, like I was famous for just being too loud, because like the teacher would had like a decibel reader or whatever, like in class. He's like, these are the measurements. This is the decibel level of a plane at 100 feet taking off, right? And then like, so he's like, Beebe, like yell something and we'll see what decibels. And then I beat a plane at 100 feet. I mean, granted, it was in a room bigger than this, right? Like, and I'm just yelling in it, but like.
Hard for me to imagine.
Right, yeah.
You
Well,
don't come
I'm on-
across that way.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, people always have different frustrations in their lives, right? And it's just an easy way. Like, in high school, that's, like, I was always, like, the quiet kid, but then, like, when I was in the band, they're like, whoa, you talk. And it's like, yeah, well, like, I yelled for the entire show, you know? So, like,
Yeah.
until, like, I didn't have a voice at the end of it, but that way I didn't have to talk to anybody, right?
Sure.
I don't know if that was in my head at the time or not, but it was definitely happening, you know.
Do you still ever feel shy about performing, or is that gone now?
Yeah, I do. In different capacities, you know. Like, I've never done like a speech like this before, right? Like, where I'm talking about art in this kind of context. But I do talk about art on my podcasts and things too, and so it's like, oh, so I get to have a podcast and I don't have to have anybody like to like wait to talk next.
Yeah,
Cool,
yeah.
right? Another thing I wanted to say, you were talking about like reading and like how to get kids into reading, and it made me think about like how I got into reading, because like I always hated reading. My mom was a librarian, so we were always at the library. I'd always be reading about the Nintendo Power magazines, or like the Discover Planet magazines, or whatever they were, and like, but then like once I got to high school or middle school, like they started giving us like Watership Down, maybe was one of the books, and like, you know, the books that they give you when you're that old, and I didn't even read them. I was just like, these are dumb. Like, I don't care, you know. And but then it wasn't until about I guess when I hit high school, it only caught my attention because I was like intrigued by the counterculture, right? Like, what is like subversive nature of art in general, right? And the movie Fight Club kind of got my imagination in 1999. And then that's also where I encountered Tom Waits for the first time. He was in the soundtrack of that movie. And anyway, I found out that the writer of the movie was a book, and so I went and found another book that guy wrote, and I read that, and I was like, this is insanity. Like, I don't know anything of the world of this book, you know? Because the guy was very much just like trying to push limits on purpose and being a little bit sociopathical in his writing at the same time, which I don't read any of his stuff now, Chuck Palahniuk, because like I just don't like any of that now. But like at the time, it was completely
Attractive
like,
because
right.
it's different.
Yeah, exactly. And in that vein, he just took like basic, tropes of society and broke them down, essentially. Like, and that's what I found fascinating. And then once I got out of high school, I ended up, I don't know, smoking a lot of pot, and then ended up going to rehab, and then meeting this guy who just like, he was so far out as well to me, out of my own experience, you know. He was like in an entirely different level of it than I was, you know, like, and he just like, all of his stories started off, he's like, dude, man, this one time I almost died. And then like, I was like, okay, cool, I want to hear what you're trying to tell me right now, because this is amazing. And but I used to bring like a Hunter S. Thompson book to class, the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It was a hilarious book. And then like, he saw that I was reading that, and he's just like, oh, but have you ever read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World? Or have you ever read 1984? Or like all these other classics, dystopian novels? And that's where I got into that whole world. You know, George Orwell did lots of books as well. That, I mean, breaking down the fabric of society once again, really. Like, I mean, Brave New World turns society completely upside down. You know, like, what are the norms? Well, let's not do that. What is the opposite of that, actually? What's the consequences of having corporate logos, right? Like, 100 years from now, you know, like, these are religions, essentially. That's how religions start, right? Like, that's in the brain when we see the Ford logo, you know. It's the same as like when they saw the cross like 100 years ago, or even now, you know. still remnants of that in the culture. But I mean, Huxley, I mean, himself, like, broke down religion. I mean, the book Perennial Philosophy was amazing because he was able to break down every single religion into chapters and take not the texts themselves, right, but like the people who would write, like Thomas Aquinas, like people who kind of deciphered the religions and like were big for each of their respective groups of people, right? And would take quotes from each of those people and put them next to each other under chapter headings like, you know, I don't know, prayer, meditation, or just like love or the golden rule. Like, you know, about 26 chapters later, you're like, wow, all religions are the same. Cool. You know, like when it comes down to it, there's like mystical stories in each of them that are completely different, right? But they're all trying to say essentially the same thing, you know? Which, I mean, like as an early 20-year-old, you know, reading this book, you know, like it took me a year to read it, because it was like super heavy, like writing wise, you know, like, and you like read like one page and you're like, I gotta think about that for a minute, you know. But yeah, so I don't know, like that was really impactful upon, you know, like my writing since then. And just trying to figure out, like, just knowing that no one really knows what the world is, but we all have kind of a general sense of like, oh, well, we all just want to get along, essentially, you know, like, it's really, nothing is that complicated. Even like, we've been doing the exact same thing on the planet the entire time humans have been here, essentially. And like, all jobs are just like, oh, I'm going to get this one thing from point A and I'm going to bring it over here to point B. And that's like every job extrapolated out, like, by a million, like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of specialization versus generalization in that statement, right? Like where you have people who get super deep, like super nerds who are just studying things nonstop, but then they can't see the whole picture. And then they get too deep into things and they can't see the consequences of their actions sometimes because they're like, oh, I can build this robot to talk to me and things like that. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but do we really need to? Or like, what's it for? Or what's like, extrapolate out a few years, bigger picture wise. But yeah, and that's, I don't know, kind of also the capitalistic nature of our society too, right? Like it's like, well, new technology equals money, so we're going to put a bunch of money into new technology to make more money, and it just kind of feeds itself. Whereas like, how do you fund research that's just going to benefit everybody, like in a normal day? Like that doesn't necessarily get funding because it's like, it seems trivial, right? How do you feed poor people? Well, okay, well that's easy, right? Or whatever, you know, basic needs are to be met, you know, like that's, seems like priority number one, but that's not a good way to make money, right? So it's like not funded. Yeah, not to get too political or anything, but like that's seems to be what's happening.
So I have a question for you, maybe. So,
Yeah.
other than like, you know, life experience wherever you are in the moment, and you named like some other like artistry type influences from your younger age, what are some influences other than life experience that you have right now in your artistry, like whether it's musicians or authors that you like currently follow? What's your influences lately?
As far as music, I've been listening to a lot of this guy, French 79. He's an electronic artist from France, and he's playing in Toronto tomorrow, which is why I'm trying to go really bad. He's playing in Chicago tonight. Otherwise, I'd be there if I wasn't doing this. That's fine.
Your dedication is amazing.
Well, I find these things like, it's like Bob Dylan doing the interview like back in '65 where he has the press conference like, Bob Dylan, are you going to go see these shows? It's like, well, I would, but I'm already doing something. I have to play the shows too. I'm already happening, you know? Bob Dylan, what do your songs mean? It's like, I don't know, man. What do they mean to you, man? I don't know. As far as authors, I don't know. I pick up books that are David Graeber is really big right now to me because he wrote. I mean, he's an anthropologist. He's a professor. He died just a couple of years ago, but he wrote some really good books. Just published like the year after he died, they published his last book because he died kind of young. He died of COVID out in Italy, but he super smart guy. Like I just checked out like one of his like interviews, and like he's just like has his cup of coffee and he's just talking. He's dropping ideas between ideas nonstop, and you're like, okay, this guy knows everything about history, right? Like, and he's just trying to bring it to the forefront. He wrote a whole book about the history of debt and like 5,000 years of debt, like how basically how money works and where money comes from, but like told from the angle of from that kind of other angle. And he's just like, well, no one's done this before, technically, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and people view debt in a lot of different strange ways throughout time and in different cultures even today. I mean, if you travel to like South America and different places, they'll be like, okay, if you're new to the community, they'll bring you something and then you have to give something back, but it can't be equal in value to the thing that they gave you. Otherwise, that's not, that's rejection of their friendship. Because it's like either I need to be in your debt or vice versa. That creates a certain type of bond between people, right? And that's how we've used debt for thousands of years in larger sense. And even today in our society now, I mean, we do that amongst family, right? Like, or friends. It's like, oh, don't worry about it. Yeah, you can use that. You know me or whatever. It's like that's technically like a form of debt or money or like that. And like those types of ideas are really important, I think, just in context of like what is like a debt jubilation, just forgiveness of all debts across the board. I mean, that was in the Bible as well, right? Like that's like one of those ideas that has kind of been lost in translation, and now we're like, because this always happens, right? People become too greedy or it goes too much in one direction, and then we gotta like reconcile, like it's like, okay, we can't live anymore, so things have to change, what do we do? So it's always one of those kind of push and pull kind of balances of like society like that. But he's a really, really smart guy. I was way into him at the end of the year, and then I kind of like, it was too heavy for a minute, so I had to like, I've been reading some like fictional novels and things like that. But now I'm starting to get back into that world again. He wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs, and like just talking about people's jobs and like how people don't really work all day or as much as the hours say they do, or sometimes like this job is completely pointless at all. And like he's like, how much work are we really doing? How much work do we need to do in our society? How much can we automate in 20 years, right? Like there's a lot of questions right now as far as what work means, how that is going to affect money and so on. And these are all like really big questions and how we're like going to move forward, because society is going to change drastically in the next 20, 30 years. I think just because like just baseline stuff like that, it's just, that's just what's happening. I mean, like I was going to try to get into writing, like freelance writing and things over the winter. I found this like AI writing app that could just like, you type in the subject matter, right? And you can just hit outline. You could put what tone that you want the writing to be in, and then you hit the button and it makes like 5-6 paragraphs right there for you in the matter of 1, 2, 3. Oh, there it is. Okay, it's all written. And like I would just type in stuff I didn't know just to see what it would say. Like I'm like, what about blockchain voting? And the guy's like, oh, well, this is what it came from, and this is where it's going. I'm like, okay, great. This is an article I haven't read yet that I just generated from this AI that like doesn't seem like possible, But those types of things are happening already, like, and they're for sale. I can subscribe to it, and I did. I'm like, what kind of songs can you write? I wouldn't write like that. That's dumb, like. That's just. You have to live my whole life to get to where I am saying this,
That's right.
But I don't know. It's just it's a really cool time to be alive, I think, in that sense. It could be a lot of upheaval, and just a lot of people are butting heads over a lot of things that they feel like it's like, well, things have always been this way. Well, have they? They've always been this way for like 100 years, right? Like before that, everything was completely different, we changed from horses to automobiles in 10-year time. Like a picture of New York City is all horses in like 1902, and then in 1912 I think it was, all cars, all Model Ts, like complete switchover. That's an entirely different form of society altogether in 10 years time. And it's completely possible to happen again, you know? And that's, I really want to like try to start veering my writing into that kind of world more so too, you know, just because it needs help to get there, you know, like, and we need like touchstones, you know, just like basic like tenets of like what all of this stuff means, you know, and it's not going to be anything crazy, you know, like it's just like basic human stuff, you know. Huxley said in the foreword to Brave New World on the reissue, he was talking about how humans would break their bones to conform to the machines of the future, right? And like that imagery always kind of really stuck with me, to the point where like the way that I always like, I mean, obviously electronic music has existed for the last, you know, since the 80s, and like I never wanted to go in those directions at all, because I wanted to try to keep things like organic or as like human as possible, I guess. And so I would always just like not try to be, I was very perfectionistic about things for a little while, like early on. And then I met a guy over in Kent, Bob Penix from the Coffin Riders, and he like completely veered me away from this whole like super like, because I was like super meticulous with all my writing at that point, you know, writing these huge pieces that were like all over the place, and like just time signature changes in the middle that didn't make sense sometime, but like when you orchestrated it, it was just like wild, you know, like, and so, and he approached art completely different, you know, and where he was just like, well, just get it out there, it doesn't matter, you know, we did it, it's done, just put it out, like it doesn't matter, because like I was like, well, if we do this with the cover art, like, he's like, it doesn't matter, just do it, you know. Like, I was like, okay, cool. And like that whole like kind of process to where it's just like, when it's done, and just get it out the door and move on. Like early on I had a band that broke up because I would just constantly rewrite the songs all the time. And it's like, my band couldn't keep up with me. No one knew where they were in the song after a while, because like, well, what version of the song are we doing now, you know? And like, and that's, I just needed to like cut and write a new song, you know? That's what I was really needing to do, and I didn't know it until the band broke up, and I'm like, okay, this is why this all went wrong.
It's almost like trusting your process, and like how freeing that is if you weren't able to do it before and now you are.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And that's, in a large sense, that's kind of why I became a multi-instrumentalist too, so I could kind of like control things on that level if I wanted to, right? Like I'm like, well, I want the song to be like this now, so I'm just gonna record it like that, you know, and not have to bother anybody, not have to work within people's schedules or make anybody angry. I'm just gonna do what I do no matter what, you know. And so I'm in a couple bands right now, but I don't push anything on them, you know. I'm just like, all right, like if it doesn't fly, it doesn't fly. I don't say anything. I just go home and write the song, you know, like the way that I want it to be, because that's what I'm gonna do anyway. And that is almost like a pressure release valve for band scenarios, which is nice. Being able to do everything, at least to the capacity I can now. I mean, I've been doing it for long enough now that like I can at least, like this is the first time I feel last few years that I've been able to like multi, you know, purpose like all the different instrument wise, you know. But yeah, perfectionism kills the liveliness of the music and just like the immediacy. Kurt Cobain once said that if you go into the studio and you're recording an album more than a week, like what are you even trying to do? What are you even trying to figure out? You know, like it's the immediacy is gone. It's the entire like kind of like feeling is gone, and you're just thinking about it too hard at that point. You know. I always took that comment real heavy. He was recording with Steve Albini when he made that comment out in Chicago, I almost recorded with that guy out there. It's just, you know, you can buy recording time and go out there. He's pretty cheap. He's pretty reasonable. And I always wish I had, because I ended up recording that second album with that band with a friend of mine, and he lost all the tracks. And that second album never came out. And I've been the last couple winters, I've been kind of like redoing some of those songs again, just by myself, because I can now.
Yeah.
And I'm like going through them, and I'm like, wow, this section doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I'm just gonna completely. Hey.
Sorry, we're closed.
Okay.
So
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to like cut you
Yeah.
guys short, but I'm
Not
actually
at
gonna
all.
sneak through and left.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's a good way to.
Sorry.
Well, I brought my guitar, so there it is. Yeah.
So in the summer, are you open later?
No, on Wednesdays we're always 8 o'clock, and then so we're 8 o'clock on Wednesday, 9 o'clock on Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday we're till 10 o'clock,
Okay.
and then Sunday we're only till 6 o'clock.
Okay.
So the hours are kind of weird. Sometimes I wish you would just make Thursday and Wednesday like 9 o'clock. Just that way it's not so much change, like people get confused. But I'm just like, I've been here almost a year and I still don't. Don't ask me when we open during the week because I have no idea. Like on the weekends it's noon. Like I have no idea, guys.
Well, it was a wonderful conversation.
Yes,
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I had a lot of fun.
I gotta tell you, when you were talking about the anthropologist and you talked about him being so smart,
Yeah.
you are so smart.
You are.
I'm just.
Shucks.
No, I
I
mean,
can talk to you about everything.
I know,
and
it gets your
anything.
wheels spinning.
Yes.
And